Yate. Good morning. Please be seated. First, I want to begin by thanking Lou Powell for being part of our liturgy this morning. Thank you, Lou, for the gift of your presence and of your prayers. I so appreciate it. In the Sacred Ground readings, there is a recollection that a black man shares about reading the Bible to his grandmother, who had been an enslaved woman. When he asked her what she wanted him to read, she said, "Anything but Paul. I love the Bible, but I do not want to hear anything about Paul." When he asked her why, she told him how, when she had been enslaved, the master brought out the preacher on Sundays, and he always read the parts where Paul orders the slaves to obey their masters. She listened to that week after week, year after year, and now that she had a choice, she did not want to hear from Paul again. I understand that. Paul's writings have been controversial. Many of us do not want to hear Paul when he goes on about sexual orientation and driving people from the community. And many of us don't want to hear him tell women to be silent in church and subject to their husbands. But you know, I found in this week's lessons that Paul resonates for me much more than that passage from Matthew. That parable is very awkward and disturbing, and it doesn't seem to fit with Jesus' actions in gathering an inclusive community around him. I think the parable speaks more to the fears and concerns in Matthew's community, whereas Paul, with its list of characteristics, whatever is true, just, commendable, that he urges the Philippians, and by extension us, to ponder and emulate, that resonates for me, especially on this occasion. You see, I think there is a way in which these two passages are a sort of illustration of the relationship that the church has had with indigenous people. I think that the church has invited Native folks into Christianity, but then we showed up with the wrong wedding robe. I am speaking about the wrong robe of skin color, the wrong robe of language, the wrong robe of culture, the wrong robe of spirituality, the wrong robe of a way to live on the land. Indeed, in its history, the church has been trying to force us all into the same garment, and that has been the cause of much weeping and gnashing of teeth. For the last decade, at least, of his ministry, Lou Powell has traveled the diocese, offering workshops on the doctrine of discovery, that infamous papal teaching that established a spiritual, political, and legal justification for seizing the land, the possessions, the resources of non-Christians, and the enslavement of the inhabitants themselves. It gave cover to the explorers and the empire builders and played itself out in the manifest destiny policy that supported the Western expansion of the United States. Many are shocked to learn of the church's role in so much greed and suffering. But the moral arc of the universe has been slowly bending. And in 1997, the Episcopal Church designated a decade of remembrance, recognition, and reconciliation that would guide a new relationship with Indigenous people. And in 2007, as the nation commemorated the 400th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, the Episcopal Church announced a decade of action in which the church renewed its commitment to, quote, fully recognize and welcome Native peoples into congregational life, end quote. Indeed, at our own diocesan convention that year, we affirmed the church's plan, and I'm quoting here again, to recognize and welcome Native people into the congregational life, develop culturally inclusive liturgies, and support the spiritual, cultural, and social values of the indigenous nations of Northern California, end quote. Supporting the spiritual, cultural, and social values of indigenous people sounds pretty close to Paul's exhortation to recognize in others those things that are true, honorable, just, and pleasing. The church's stance now is one of recognizing indigenous people in our communities. It is the practice of learning the history of Native people in the places where we live and worship. It is the work of building and strengthening relationships with Native people. This has been the work that Lou Powell has engaged. This is the work for which I am being commissioned today. But the fact that we are having this public liturgy in the sight of God and everyone reflects the church's understanding that it is not my task alone, but that it is our shared ministry. And I am being called to exercise leadership, to encourage and nurture your efforts. So this is me encouraging you to learn more about indigenous people locally, to recognize the good and the excellent in Native culture, to think on what is just and commendable, to build relationships based on these shared values. We don't all have to wear the same wedding garment anymore. Let us do what St. Francis was reported to have advised. Always preach the gospel, sometimes use words. Amen.